If you've ever seen a picture-perfect garden online and wondered, how'd they do that? I'm going to bring you behind the scenes in this video and show you all the nitty-gritty details. You're going to see how we build the raised beds, how we fix the soil, and even how we set up the irrigation. So let's get started. If we haven't met yet, my name's Nicole Johnsey-Burke, and I'm the owner and founder of Gardenary. We are your resource for all things raised bed gardening. Now, I moved into this house 3 summers ago in June of 2022, and I already felt behind on the growing season. So my parents were in town, and we literally threw a garden together in 1 weekend. We set up the garden with corten steel raised beds, which are in the Gardenary Shop, and I love, but I had never grown with steel beds before. We put the whole thing together over a weekend, and boom, I had a garden. Now, I really enjoyed that garden for a few years, but there were a couple things that I just didn't love, and I wanted to upgrade. So a year ago, we called in the crew, and we decided to completely destroy the garden so that we could build a better one. So I had 3 key things that I wanted to fix with this garden upgrade. But before we could do any of that, I had to rescue some of my plants. There were perennial herbs that had been growing on the edges of almost all my raised beds, and I did not want to lose them because I knew they would be back in just a few months. So I hurried out into the garden. I grabbed the sage, the thyme, the oregano, the rosemary, anything that showed any promise of coming back. I dug them out of the garden as fast as possible. Now, something I did really quickly that first summer is set up this native plant pollinator garden space around my garden. I use this as a natural living fence. I have a whole video about it. I'll link to it below this video. I use it to bring an ecosystem to my garden space to balance out pest pressure. It's the best thing. But it had become completely overgrown with lemon balm and anise hyssop. I had planted a few random things that summer because honestly, it was like the middle of the summer in Nashville, and for some reason, a lot of places didn't have good plants. They were like done selling plants for the season. So I grabbed a couple of lemon balms, and those things had taken over these garden spaces. So one of the first things I had the guys help me do is remove a lot of those unwanted plants around the native plant garden space. And I also needed a little bit more structure there. So I got into a situation where the plants were just sprawling and heading into the grass. And if you're married, raise your hand. And if your husband mows the yard around your garden, raise your hand. You're going to know what I'm talking about. We were having a couple little conversations about the fact that my garden was growing into Jason's grass. I decided to ask the guys to help me add some steel edging to completely border the entirety of the native plant space. So that gives me a little, like a line of neutrality where I can keep my plants inside the steel edging, and then Jason can happily weed eat and mow around it. So the first thing I wanted to really change about this garden is I wanted to go from steel beds to cedar beds. There's a couple of reasons for this. I really love the corten steel look. I loved having those beds in my garden, but there's a few things that I was missing from these trusty cedar beds I'd had all my other years in the garden. First was the ability to sit on the bed. As someone who loves working in the garden and spending time out here, I love to be able to sit right on the edge of the garden and work. And those steel beds, they were like really, really thin and impossible to sit on. So I was missing that aspect and comfort of gardening. I also really missed the 2-foot tall raised beds. So those steel beds, they only come in like a 16-inch height, which is better than 1 foot or 6 inches, but still not tall enough for me to be able to stand and tend the garden. So I just wanted to make gardening more comfortable for myself. Plus, we had just added these cedar beds into our Gardenary Shop. And do you remember that? You're probably too young for this, but there was this commercial growing up about like the hair club for men. And the guy would always be like, I'm not just the president, I'm a customer. And so I feel that same way about everything we have at Gardenary. I never want to sell you something or have something in the shop that I don't use myself. And so I wanted to have all these cedar beds that we sell in the shop in my garden too, so I can test them out, use them, find the weaknesses and strengths of them so that anytime someone buys them, they know, hey, I'm gardening in the same kind of material. So I wanted to test our products, have them in my own garden, but mostly I wanted to just sit down on the raised bed. So to do that, we had to pull out the existing steel beds. And these things, it was amazing to see how firm the soil structure was inside these raised beds. These guys had to work super hard. I'm so grateful to them. And to show my gratitude, I actually donated all the raised beds to these guys. They took them home with them as a thank you because, man, they had to work hard to get these raised beds up and out of the garden. Now, anybody that knows me knows that me and like a hammer and a nail and some kind of construction kit is a very, very bad idea. Number one, I hate following instructions. And number two, I'm really bad with tools. So the first step was just to see, could I take these kits from our Gardenary beds and actually accurately put them together? So we started by staining the wood. This is with our eco-friendly stain that's going to make the wood last a really long time. We laid everything out, and this eco stain is wonderful. It's just like little minerals that you soak into water, dilute in water, and then we just found out over the years doing these for clients, it works really well with a sponge. So this sponge, you just dip it in, and then literally you can just coat all of the wood at the same time. Now, I have 8 beds here, so it was quite a feat to coat all these things with a stain, but you definitely want to put it on before you construct the beds. So we laid everything out, started coating everything with the stain, and then it was time to test my abilities to follow instructions and put the raised bed together. So these slide together pretty well. Everything is kind of centered around these big posts on the edges. And these posts have like beveled cutouts where you slide the boards in. And it kind of is a 2-person job because you need the edges to stay where they are, the corners, and then you really need to push the wood down at the same time. So you don't want one side to go down before the other. But once you kind of figure out that pattern and get a partner to help you, it's literally just sliding one board in after the other. Once you get all the pieces slid in and everything's got nice labels like A, B, C, D, E, F. I mean, if you know your alphabet, you can figure it out. So once you do that, then it's time for the hardest part, which is putting the trim together. I over time realized putting this trim, you basically want to have it on a very flat surface. It doesn't work well to put it on grass. So we place it on my patio because you want all of this to be flush with the ground so that as you attach it and flip it over, it's nice and flat. All of the edges are flat with one another. I made all the mistakes with previous beds. So this one, I kind of had figured it out. So you slide and everything kind of comes pre-drilled. So you're just literally putting the screws right into place. So set up the frame, and then this top goes right on top, and then you just screw everything down in the corners, and boom, you're done. So we were in a little bit of a time crunch because these guys were moving fast and we're on the clock. They got the 2 first steel beds out and they were ready right away to grab those new 4x8x2 beds. And man, it was crazy to see the size difference and the height difference when they placed the cedar beds here in the garden. It was like, whoa, all of a sudden it was really tall and it just felt even wider than what we had with the steel. Steel has a really small footprint, so the garden just felt like a different place immediately with the cedar beds here. So I put these 2 together, and then I think we did the back 2, and I saved the small 4 beds for after lunch. I had to get a couple of tacos in my stomach before I could do those. Then we were ready to kind of place everything, and the garden was starting to come together. Now, the second thing I wanted to fix in my garden was setting up an automated irrigation system. So we have a whole video about an easy irrigation system. If you haven't watched it, you can watch it here. I'll put the link below this video. But this garden, like I said, we rushed it a couple summers ago, so it was not irrigated. This worked fine for me in Chicago because the summers were rainy and rarely too hot. But we had a couple of summers here where I was out of town and I literally lost my garden because it was in the high 90s. No one was here watering, and the things just stressed out and burnt out. So I didn't want this to happen anymore. You know what I mean? Like when you work hard to get your plants to make it through spring and early summer, the last thing you want to do is come home from vacation and see that everything is done. So I wanted to add automated irrigation. And the way that we did that is the guys who help us in the garden, they tied the garden to a new line. I have an existing irrigation system in my yard. We tapped into that. What you have to do though, for your garden is this is actually on these little emitters, small little emitters. You actually need this garden to be on a different zone because these emitters, they don't need to have the same power as, the normal spray heads in your garden. So they set up a new zone for the garden, and then basically every single place that there is a raised bed, they ran a pipe underneath the garden space and then pulled the line up into the bed. And that allowed them at each top to connect all these small emitters emitters that I then spread out through my garden space. Now you'll see me talk also about drip irrigation, which I love, but what I wanted to test in my own garden are these small emitters, because when you plant by seed, you don't just need water at the root, you actually need water on the soil surface as well. So the goal with these emitters is to give me that nice soil surface water, but not have water high up in the air where it can easily be evaporated. This solved my second problem, which was not having irrigation, and I'm happy and pleased to say my garden survived its first summer with irrigation this past summer in Nashville. Now, the third problem I wanted to solve was my soil. Remember, I did my garden a little too fast back in the summer of 2022, and I quickly called a soil supplier, asked them if they had a certain kind of soil mix. They said yes, but what they delivered was way different than what I had described. I even advise against this. I don't know why I did it. I was just in too much of a hurry. But never ever order bulk soil from a company if you haven't held that soil in your hands and looked at the texture of it. So the soil I had for my existing raised beds was way too heavy. It had a lot of gravel in it for some reason, and it had a lot of clay in it. And so I wanted to loosen up the soil and use more of my soil mix. If you've never heard about my 103 mix, it's in my books, Kitchen Garden Revival and Leaves, Roots, and Fruit. And I also have a whole download you can grab on it. I'll put it right below this video. So my favorite soil mix is compost, topsoil, and coarse sand mixed with earthworm castings. So I ordered a special order for the soil. We kept all the base of the soil the same, but then everything we added on top was the new kind of soil. So I got to basically regenerate my soil, start with better soil. I still have that original soil down really low, but most of the plants that I'm growing in the garden, they're only going to be really basing their growth on the top 12 inches of soil. And I got to replenish and fix all of that, which was wonderful and a lot of work. So about halfway through adding in the soil, I got to do one other thing, which wasn't really a problem to fix, but definitely an addition, which is doubling my arch trellises. So in the previous garden, I just had one arch trellis per bed. And if you're anything like me, you know that there's like no such thing as too many trellises. I would get into every season and I'd have tomatoes growing on one trellis, but I was really wishing I had a place to grow pole beans or cucumbers, and I just ran out of vertical growing space. So I doubled my Nicole arches. I added 2 here in the front and 2 in the back. And then I put obelisk trellises in all the center beds. And this made me so happy. The best time to put the trellises in is when you've got about 1 foot of soil in the beds, and then you place the trellises in. And then that second foot of soil really secures the trellises and helps make sure that they're going to stay put when they're holding all those vines of plants. So at that point, we were pretty close to perfect. It was February, I think, when we redid this garden. So it was perfect timing to get ready for spring planting. By that point, the beds were in place. We had gravel and stepping stones. The soil was replenished and great. And I had doubled the trellises in my garden. And I was so happy. So looking back, it was a great year of gardening. My garden lasted through the heat of the summer. To be honest, I was super busy this past year, and I missed out on some of the best planting windows simply because I was just busy running my business and taking care of my kids. So my goal is to make more use of all this great growing space this year and to grow more things that I really use in the kitchen. I'm aiming to use and plant way more cucumbers. That was my family's favorite thing. I am only doing grape tomatoes and large tomatoes, no more cherry tomatoes this coming year. I had a ton here, but I just didn't really use them in the kitchen that much. I'm going to grow way more beans. I was so wishing that I had more beans to pickle and to cook with throughout the summer and into the fall. And then I'm going to do tons of root crops in the spring and in the fall. We're talking carrots, radishes, beets, and I am not skipping out on potatoes this year. So I'm going to grow tons and tons of potatoes and sweet potatoes this year in the garden. So it was a great first year. Sometimes when you don't start the year with a brand new garden, this was February when I got mine going, I missed out on some important things like garlic and ginger that would have been growing throughout the winter. So this year I am ready. It's going to be the best season yet. Now I want to show you the next garden transformation. This is going to help you see how you could set up a smaller garden but still has a huge impact. And this is the garden I set up for my parents later that same year. You can watch that video right here.